Hello, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you at our final Angular Spring Camp meetup. Over the course of these two meetings, we have had a chance to hear from some of the best Angular experts and attend some truly enlightening lectures. I am Mateusz, and I am thrilled to be your host for today's event. I represent Angular.love community, which has put together this awesome series. We are live streaming from our office in Warsaw, Poland. Let us know in the comments from which city you are joining us. Today, another dose of knowledge awaits you with three amazing lectures. Deborah Kurata will discuss Angular RxJS and Signals better together. Then Dmytro Mezheński will dive into the architecture of Angular forms. And finally, Manfred Steyer will share three effective rules for successfully using signals in Angular. Following each talk, we'll have the Q&A session, so don't hesitate to drop your questions on the chat. We'll try to make sure that all of them will be asked. Following the pre-elections, we also set up a remote networking via Google Meet. The link will be visible on the chat. Okay, so get ready for a fantastic lineup of speakers and some great Angular insights. I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, Deborah Kurata. Deborah is a renowned software developer, Pluralsight author, a conference speaker, honored as Microsoft MVP and Google Developer Expert. She also runs a YouTube channel where she educates developers, so make sure that you will check it out. Hello, Deborah.
Hey.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm fine too. And before we just go to your pre-elections, I would like to ask you a question, because I know that you're extremely experienced software engineer. And what do you believe right now are the most important skills for the young programmers to develop nowadays?
Well, this industry, as you know, is constantly changing. Even Angular itself is rapidly changing how it works. So I think one of the most important things that developers need to learn is to be able to accept change and kind of learn how they learn. People in this industry have to be constantly re-educating themselves. And so to understand yourself, if you learn better from videos, or if you learn better from articles, or if you learn better from going to seminars, to kind of understand that about yourself so that you can feel comfortable jumping into an environment that just constantly, rapidly changes.
That's true. Like IT is the place where we constantly learn. And for me, this moment is slightly special, because I remember when I have been starting with programming, I've been watching your courses on Pluralsight, and today I have a pleasure, to be host at the meetup where you're attending and just give a talk. So it's awesome for me. So without taking more time, like, the stage is yours, and we'll see on the Q&A session.
All righty. Okay, hopefully that font is good enough. All right. So now that Angular signals have been around for a while, we're starting to see some patterns emerge. The pattern that we're going to look at today is our Redux-ish, and really illustrates how RxJS and Angular signals are better together. So we're going to jump in. First, we're going to look at the completed application, so we kind of have a sense of how it works. So I've got my, I can say that I'm a team leader, and here are my list of team members, and I can pick one, and I see a loading indicator, I see their name up here, and I see their list of tasks. I can show only their incomplete tasks, and I can mark tasks as completed. Okay, so it's not a huge UI, but we have limited time to build this thing. So I'm going to move to the unfinished one, and we can tell because it doesn't do anything when I pick somebody from the list. So this is the one we're going to start with. Now, I already built the HTML because y'all don't want to sit and watch me create this HTML. We see here we've got a change that is bound to an onSelected method. We've got our checkbox here, this guy over here, its change tied to an onFilter method. And then when we check the little box on the changing the status of our completion status on our tasks, there's a change event on that on change status. If we look at the component, I am hard coding all the signals that we're binding to just to default values, and our methods are empty because we're going to build the service. All right, so here's the service. That's pretty much it. So we obviously need more code here. We have the interface for to-dos, but that's obviously not enough for managing the state of our component. So what state do we need? Let's define a second interface. So I also have a method down here that just maps an error response to an error message. Okay, so we're going to export an interface, and I'm going to call it to-do state. So what do we need? Well, you saw that is loading flag, so we probably want an is loading indicator of some kind so that the component knows when it's loading. We also need to know what member that was picked from this list. So I'm going to call that current member. And that member could be defined as a user, or it could be undefined. When the application first comes up, there is no person selected, so it would be undefined. We also need, of course, our to-dos, and that's going to be, a to-do array. And hopefully we won't need it, but maybe we want an error string as well. That could be a string or null. All right, now when we start our application up or bring up this page, we want to ensure our state is our page is in a valid state. So we're going to define up here our initial state. Oops. My keyboard is crooked and kind of hitting the wrong keys. All right, so initial state. So here I'm just going to call it state. I'm really good at naming. And because it is now 2024, we are creating our services to expose signals. So our component would be working completely with signals. So this is going to be a signal of to-do state. So it needs a default value, or initial value rather. So we're going to define our initial state here. Is loading when we first bring it up is going to be false. Current member, oops, that's a comma. Current member is going to be undefined. Keep wanting to put those semicolons. Member to-dos. Initially, we don't have a member, so we don't have their to-dos. We'll just leave that empty, and our error will be a null. So now we have our initial state for our application. So notice, however, that we've defined that to be private. So how the heck is our component supposed to get access to that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to define what's called in Redux land or in NGRX land selectors. And selectors give us pieces or slices of our state, and these will make public. So these can be accessed by our component. So we're going to take each one of our slices of state that our component needs and provide that as a public property here. All right, so the first one I'm going to call is loading, and we're going to make it a computed signal, so it's read only. That way our service completely controls when our state is actually updated. So we're providing read-only values to the component. So our computed is going to give us this .state, and we need to open the box in order to access the instance of the object that's in that signal, and then we can call is loading. Okay, so you get the general idea there. I'm going to save some typing and paste this in. the rest of them in. So yeah, if you see me kind of glancing to my left here, I have some of the code here that I can paste in, so I don't have to quite type so much. All right, so here we have our selectors then. Each one of them is a computed property, and each one is providing the value of one of the slices of our state. Okay, so we've defined the state, we've defined the selectors. The next thing we want to do is define our actions. What actions does our component need to support? Well, the obvious one, of course, is selecting a team member. So, excuse me, our next question then is, how do we want to react to that action? Now, we know that one of the things that we are going to want to do when the user selects a team member is we're going to need to go get some data. We're going to need to get those tasks for that team member. We know that that's going to be an HTTP request, which is asynchronous. It would be really nice if we could create a computed signal for an asynchronous operation, but we can't. It would be nice if we could create, and it's highly recommended that we don't update state in an effect. You know, there's a little flag, we can fake it, but it's recommended that you don't really use an effect for that. So this is where RxJS comes in. It can be really our best friend in this area. So what we want to do is we want to be able to react to the user selecting a team member. Now that drop-down box, that select box, is going to give us the ID of that selected team member. So what we want to do, since we want to react and then process an async operation, is we're going to use a subject. So I'm going to create a subject, selected ID subject, whoops, and it's going to be a new subject, and its type is number. And that's because the ID that we're getting from the drop-down list is going to be a number. Now, we then want a method that our component can call. I'm going to call it getToDos for member. And we're going to pass in the member ID, which, as we said, is a number. And this is going to take that subject and it's going to next in that ID. So what this does is it emits that value into the subject. So in our constructor, we can react to that. So this dot selected ID subject dot pipe. Now we could also do an as observable here and put it into observable and react to that observable. But since this is all private and managed in our service, we really don't need to do that. That was very useful when we were using an async pipe because we could make that part public. But we can do this. All right, so what do we want our process to do then? What is our reaction for this action? Well, the first thing we probably want to do is set a loading indicator. So I'm going to just use a tap for that. And instead of writing all of the code in my pipeline to update the state for is loading, we're just going to call a method, set loading indicator, and pass it true. Okay, we don't have that function created yet. We'll create it in a minute. So we'll have to ignore our errors here until I get the pipeline done. Then we'll create these methods. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to get the actual member that they pick so we can display their last name. So we could do that with a tap as well. This one takes that emitted ID and it calls us, and we'll call set current member, which is another function we'll write that takes in that ID. Now I have a user service that's already created. We're not going to spend time on that, but basically what that does is it manages the list of users that's in this drop-down box, kind of hiding behind our error here. And since it has that list, it can simply look up the member by ID. So we're not issuing an HTTP request. So we can just do that with a tap. Now, as you know, RxJS operators each come with some overhead in terms of processing, tearing or setting up and tearing down, etc. So as we go to tune this app, we would probably want to combine these taps into one that calls these two methods. But right now we're just wanting to be explicit to get in what we want. All right, so our next step then is to actually issue our HTTP request. And we need for this request to be flattened. So we're going to use a higher order mapping operator, switch map. And the switch map is going to take that ID again that's been emitted into our subject, and it's going to call get to dos and pass in that ID. And again, we'll create these functions here in a moment. All right, kind of ignore this next part, but we're going to delay for a little bit. That's only just so that we can see our loading indicator. Otherwise, it's difficult to actually see it. It goes by too fast. So you wouldn't really do that in your real application. And of course, to make this go, we need to subscribe. And in our subscription, we're going to get back a set of to-dos, and we're going to update our state with that. So this dot set member to-dos and pass in those to-dos. All right. So yes, I know that we need to create all these methods. We'll do that in a moment, but there is something else that's missing here. Anyone want to guess what it is? I'll give you a hint. The golden rule of subscriptions is if you subscribe, you have to unsubscribe. So we're going to use take until destroyed. Now, if you're not familiar with that operator, I just did a YouTube video on that last week. So you can check out my YouTube channel, and I go into detail as to how it works and where it works and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so now we're ready to create all of these methods. So our first one is set loading indicators. So private set loading indicator. Yes. All right, so what are we going to do? Well, first of all, we need to pass the value. So it's our isLoading flag is going to be a Boolean. And what we're going to create here in these methods are basically, in Redux terms, are reducers. So what we're going to do is update our state based on that value. So what we're going to do is do this dot state. And since that's a signal, we're going to call the update in order to update that state. The update gives us the existing state that I'll again just call state. Again, good at naming things. And then we're going to define the new state. Now, as you know, if you just give curly braces to an arrow function, it thinks you're doing a multi-line function. So we need parentheses around that. Then we're going to, excuse me, then we're going to create new state from our existing state using the spread operator. So there we're creating a copy of the state, and then we're going to change our isLoading flag using our is passed in isLoading value. Excuse me. So that's how we're updating the state. Now, the next function that we need to create is set. Oh, did I still mistype one? Indicator, set loading indicator. There we go. Excuse me. All right, so the next one is set current member, private set current member. And this one we're passing in the ID, which is a number. And instead of watching me type that whole thing, I'm just going to paste it in, and then we'll talk about it. So, whoops. Yeah, because my fingers are not yet awake. It's morning here. All right, so the first thing I'm doing is calling my user service to get the current member. As I mentioned earlier, that's simply looking at the list that it's holding on to, its state for the drop-down list, and getting the current one. So that's not an async operation. Then it is updating the state using the same technique we're using here. We're updating the member with the member it found. This could potentially be undefined if it couldn't find it. And we're also setting the member to-dos to an empty array, because once we have a new member, we don't yet have their to-dos. Now we could make that a separate method, but I just put it as part of this. All right, so our next method is get to-dos. And I'm going to just paste that in here. All right, so get to-dos is where we are issuing our HTTP GET request. It is a parameterized query. We're using the user ID to get the to-dos just for the user. And you can sort of ignore this little bit. I'm using a public API up here, JSON placeholder for the to-dos, and the to-do titles are really long. I wanted them to fit nicely in my UI. So I cut the length down to 20. And then this calls a set error. I will paste that method. So if there are any errors, what it does is it updates the state with that error, calling the set error message function that I had down here to convert it, the HTTP error response, into something that we could display. Now, since this is being called by catch error, this function needs to either return, it needs to either throw an error or it needs to return a replacement observable. So we're returning a replacement observable that just is an empty array. So the last part here that we need is set member to-dos. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that as well. And this kind of does the same thing as the other ones. It's updating our state. So these are basically our reducers. This is taking the to-dos that we received. This one's called, scrolling up here, this is called by our subscribe when we get our to-dos. And so it's updating the state with those to-dos. And at this point, I'm setting as loading to false. Now, if we really wanted to be explicit, we could call instead a set loading indicator and pass in a false here as part of this subscribe, or we could do those as tap operators up here in our pipeline. Okay, so that was our pattern here. We defined slices of state, which is what we're doing there using selectors. We defined an action that we reacted to using RxJS. And we created a bunch of reducers to update our state based on different parts of that action. Now, in order to actually get that to work, because it's still not working, we need to make a couple of changes to our component. So I'm going to change each of our properties here that are our signals to actually reference the ones from the service. And then in our onSelected, I'm going to call the method that we created in the service, get to-dos for member, and pass in the ID from our selected team member. So at this point, when we pick a person, we see our loading indicator, we see the name here, and we get our list of to-dos. Now, notice when we check this box, it's not filtering our list. That's because we haven't yet done that part. So what do we need? Well, we can follow our pattern again. So let's go back to our service, go down to our state. And here in our to-do state, we're going to add an incomplete only flag for our little checkbox there. And of course, we get an error because we also need to define it in our initial state. So incomplete only, we're going to originally set it to false so that we see all of the to-dos. Then we can create a selector for it. Again, I'll just paste that. So we have that flag available for the component should it wants to should it want to use it. Now, the next thing is our action. So our action is, of course, to check the box. So we could do what we did last time and create a subject for it that reacts to the user clicking on that box. However, our action, our response to that action is to simply filter this list that we already have in our state. We already have the member to-dos. We're just going to be filtering it. So there really is no reason to add in a subject at that point. We can simply do another signal. So we're going to do a computed signal. I'm going to paste that in also. And it's called filtered to-dos. So what this does is if the template references this to-dos, filtered to-dos signal, every time the incomplete only filter changes, it will re-execute this code. And if that flag is true, it's going to filter to only those that have its completed flag set to false. Otherwise, it's going to return our full set of to-dos. So a rule of thumb that I use is if the action requires an HTTP GET request, you might want to consider using a subject, especially if you're going to have continual items emitted into that subject, like we are picking different team members. If the action is just synchronous, like filtering our list, we can just simply use another computed property. All right, so next we're going to have a function that the user interface can call, our component can call, called filter to-dos. And what that is going to do is update our state. Updating that state then causes our incomplete only to change, which will cause our filtered to-do to recompute. So the last thing, of course, that we need to do is modify our component. So when the user picks a filter, we are going to call filter to-dos and pass in whether the box was checked or unchecked. And the other thing is our to-dos for member that we're displaying. We're no longer going to use the standard set of to-dos. We're going to instead call the filtered to-dos. So now again, we can pick our person, see the loading indicator, see their name, see the tasks that are completed, click on the box, and now it only shows the incomplete tasks. However, if we pick one of these, it's not filtering out, and that's because we are not yet updating our signal for this check. So our last step then for our code for today is to implement that. So again, we start with the state. Well, we already have the state for this. I'm scrolling down to the bottom here. We already have this completed state here. That's where we're keeping track of the to-dos completed state. And up here at the top, we are defining the initial state by defining the member to-dos as an empty array. Now, we don't need to create a selector for that slice of state because the component doesn't access that all by itself. It instead binds to the to-do item, so we don't need to worry about that either. The main things that we do need to worry about is the action and our reducer that's going to update the state. So I actually did this as one method. So I'm going to paste that in, slide down here to my public methods, and paste that in. So here is my change status. So we're going to call this from our user interface or from our component. We're going to pass in the task. Which one did the user click on? We're going to identify whether they checked or unchecked it. Then we go through and we update our list of tasks. So we're going to take our to-dos, we're going to map them, find the one particular one that was clicked on, and change its completed status. Then we're going to update our state with that new list of tasks. This is required because in order for the signal to emit the new value, or not emit, in order for the signal to recognize that the value was changed, you actually have to change the value, not just change the internals of that. So if we just change the object inside this array, we're only changing the internal data, and this reference to that array itself is not changed. So we need to create a new array in order for the state to correctly be updated. And I guess I don't need that comma there. All right. So our last step for that then is to modify our UI. And so we're calling change status, passing in the task, and whether or not the checkbox was checked. So trying it one more time. We get our loading, we get our person, and now you can see that some of these are completed, some not. If we check the box, we get only those that are not complete. If we check one, it is now off the list because it's been correctly filtered off. Okay, so if you've used Redux or NGRX, a lot of the terminology here probably looks familiar and somewhat the processing, but this is only Redux-ish. So we started by, let's see, go back to the service. So we started by defining our state. We set an initial state, defined selectors for our component to access, defined our actions, either by using RxJS or simply reacting with a method. And we have reducers, which are changing our state. So I hope this was useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah, for this awesome presentation and showing us how we can find synergy between these two reactive words we right now have in the Angular. Right now, we'll move to the Q&A session because I saw there were already some questions. And the first one was from the Marcus. So he's asking whether that wouldn't be separate signals better for performance, since every computed is triggered when the state is changed instead of updating the exact piece of state.
For performance, the computed are all memoized, so there is no recalculation or anything done for any of those if they haven't changed. And since each one of those are separately defined as a computed, they should be separately changed in the UI. So I don't believe so. I am not sure of a good way to test that, but I would think that it wouldn't cause a problem.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a big problem even if they rerun. But as you said, mostly they should be memoized. So shouldn't this problem be a high priority, would say, even if it occur? Okay, so we have like another question. From Lisa, what the reason for choosing computed in general besides the read-only fact?
We want to use computed in that case because it gives us a way to react to changes. By having a computed signal, it will be notified every single time any of the referenced signals change. So that allows us to react to those state changes and display the value. So if we just created each one as their own separate signal, they wouldn't correctly react to each other and provide that reactivity that we're looking for, which is one of the key benefits of using signals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. There is another question from Anna. And here it's in the example you showed, do we actually need to unsubscribe? It was switch map HTTP call. self-closing?
Well, in our particular example, we actually were subscribing to a observable, that subject that would keep potentially emitting based on what's going on with the code. So that is one thing. And the second thing is, even with a one and done observable, that's an HTTP, you still run the risk of the user leaving before the data has come back. So you pick a user and you went, oh, never mind, and you go to a different option in the application, or click on a different feature or whatever, it still would not have terminated the subscription. So it's normally a good practice every time you subscribe to unsubscribe, and it's pretty easy with the take until destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we have another question from George. What the advantage of adopting Angular signals in comparison with conventional change detection with Zone.js? And I mean, besides that, it's lighter and more performant.
Well, for one, the Angular team is moving rapidly to try to remove Zone.js. So it would be nice to move to signals to prepare for that. And another reason is that Angular signals reactivity can be really nice to have. I know when I first started with Angular 100 years ago, that one of the things I really missed having were computed properties. And these computed signals are basically those computed properties where you can very easily react to changes that are happening with very little code. I have a shopping cart example that I did with all computed signals that made the whole thing about recalculating your taxes and recalculating the shipping and all of that kind of stuff really easy because of the signals. So you can save coding time, you can have your code much more reactive and easier to code, because these automatically react for you, and they are lighter and more performant. Angular team is getting rid of Zone.js, so those are a bunch of reasons.
Okay, and we have probably the last question. What about effect? It was not necessary here, or you try to avoid it as much as you can?
Well, the biggest problem with effect as it is now is we're technically not supposed to update state within an effect. And so much of what you saw was all about updating the state. Okay, we're updating state.update something. Almost every routine that we had some updating of the state. And, yes, the effect has the little flag that you can tell it, oh, no, I know better and I won't muck with it. But I am going to modify state. So I personally have been concerned about using effect for that reason. Plus, as far as I know, it's still in developer preview. Finished with it. Hopefully they're thinking about some of these things. So I have been, yes, kind of avoiding it unless I just need to do a debug kind of statement with it.
Yeah. And there is also the question was mentioned a few times, whether we can get access to your code from the StackBlitz.
Absolutely. Yes. This is all just StackBlitz. So I can post the StackBlitz link.
Okay. That will be awesome.
So I don't have the other thing open, so I'm just going to the YouTube.
Yeah, share it with us and we'll just copy paste it to the community.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Deborah. So that was the last question. We want to thank you for finding time for us, just giving us an awesome presentation. And
okay, and then I have one question, if I may.
Yeah, no problem.
Was this useful?
Yeah, it was. It was. From my opinion, it was. Then people are saying just let's.
So how about the audience?
Yeah.
And you'll have to tell me their responses, because as I said, I don't have that open.
Yes, they said definitely yes. And even throughout the talk.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw that they were saying that it's really awesome.
Okay,
very
great.
useful. Yeah. So thank you. And as I said, hopefully we'll see you on other future meetups, and have a nice day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. Okay, so before I introduce our next speaker, I would like to mention that one of the most awaited conference, NGDE, is back, and it's going to take part this October in Bonn. Right now, you can visit them site to buy some tickets, or maybe some of you already bought, so let us know. And right now, let's welcome our second speaker, Dmytro Mezhensky, who will discuss the architecture of Angular forms. He founded the Decoded Frontend YouTube channel, and he is recognized Google Developer Expert and Microsoft MVP, dedicated to teaching and enhancing Angular developer skills. Welcome, Dmytro.
Hello. Can
Hello.
you see me? Can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Yes, we can hear, we can see you. How are you doing?
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm very excited to be here and talk with you all about internal architecture of Angular forms. I hope it will be useful for you all.
It's also great for us to visit you at our meetup. So before we move to your prelection, I would like to ask you the question as well. So as I have mentioned, you are running the YouTube channel, which is pretty popular, and would like to ask you what inspired you to start creating the content for YouTube, and from where you are just gaining the new ideas for content and videos.
Well, I was thinking quite a lot about this question, and actually, there's no only one reason why I decided to create a content. It was a mix of multiple factors and circumstances. It was one of them was COVID time. I started my channel at the I think second lockdown, when everything was closed, and in Austria it was very especially strict. So I had a lot of free time, and when you have a lot of free time, crazy ideas are coming to your mind. For example, create a YouTube channel. So that was one of the things, and there are other motivations like improve the English skills, because at that time my English was very not a good one. Today it's also the same, but still. And I also wanted to improve my knowledge about Angular, because I thought that if I start to share my knowledge with other people, it helps me better to understand Angular as well. And it is indeed worked out.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people say, that if you want to learn something, you can start teaching that, and then by teaching you are also learning. Yeah, and as you said, this rule is for you true as well. Yes. Okay, so without taking more time, the stage is yours. We'll see at the Q&A session, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I forgot to say thank you to organizers of this awesome event. Guys, you did a great job. Thank you so much for that. And I'm, as I said, very excited and very happy to share with you a bit information about the internal architecture of Angular forms. We will have a look at the internal implementation of the forms a little bit, not everything, because it's a huge topic and we are limited by the time. So I will show you some interesting highlights, and we will see how we can benefit from it, how we can use those architectural decisions in order to make our forms more flexible, more maintainable, and so on. Usually I start my talk, if it's offline, with a couple of questions. I will start as well with them just to warm up. Usually we raise the hands, but because we are not on offline meeting, you can drop your answers via comments. I see them, so I can check it as well. So yeah, the first question that I would like to ask to you, very easy. That's how many types of forms are in Angular. I'm pretty sure if you have some experience, you should know already the answer. And yes, I see first answers, and all of them are correct. Yes, we have two types of forms. We have template-driven forms and reactive forms. And now I have another question, and it's a bit more tricky one. So can you determine, giving this context, having this code, can you determine for sure about which type of forms we are currently talking about? Is it template-driven forms, or it is maybe reactive forms? What do you think? Try to drop your answers. So I see reactive forms, both reactive forms. So most of the answers I see reactive forms. And for those who answered it like that, I have a good and bad news for you. So you are partially right. No, the good news is that you are right, and the bad news that you are partially right, because it depends. And I'm happy to see a lot of answers in the comments who answered that both, because indeed forms models, those are like very unique building block that is shared between all types of forms. But before, again, quick introduction, so it was already done, but my name is Dmitry Mrzhensky. I'm the author of the Decoded Frontend YouTube channel, and this QR code leads to my channel, so you can use your phones right now to scan it and check it out, and hopefully you will find my channel and the content I create useful. But let's get back to the topic. And as I said, models, they are core building blocks for all types of forms. But before we go and see how they are kind of used there, let's try to figure out what the role of form controls, of these models in general in Angular. So let's get started with just simple input, text input. What we can say about it? We can say that, okay, it is currently invalid, but it might be valid, right? It might have or might not have some value probably, or it might be disabled or enabled. So we can say that this form control has some certain state, right? And the role of the models is to describe the state of the native form control, that the corresponding native form control. Because Angular, it doesn't work like directly with the native control. It has this kind of model, these abstractions like form control. From there we get values, from there we do everything, and this is the model API. So if you worked with reactive forms, you know this API very well, I'm pretty sure, because this is general thing we do. So we can subscribe to value changes and track and react to it. We can change the state of the model by using the set value, for example, method, disable it, and so on. So this is how we interact with the model and change its state. And it is not alone. There are actually multiple of these models, not only form control, but we have some others, and all of them kind of extend their abstract control. This is the abstract class, where the most of the API you saw like inherited by all these derived classes. There is a small note, there is missing form record model, but this is the same as a form group. Basically, it's needed just to simplify the typings. But from the functional point of view, form group and form record is the same. But we currently will focus mostly on the form control. We will get back to the grouping of the controls later in this talk, but now let's focus on the form control. Let's continue to explore this part of Angular forms. And let's talk about the connection between models and controls, because by itself, models, they are pretty useless because it's just simple JavaScript class, right? So how we kind of connect them together, and we connect them by using directives that allows you to map that, okay, this exactly form control in the template like corresponds the form control model there. And we have a group, the whole group of these directives that allow us to perform that. For reactive forms, we have two directives. This is the form control for the standalone controls, and don't confuse it with the standalone components. It is slightly different concept. Standalone form control, this is the control that exists outside of the form. A good example would be, for example, in the header, we very often have something like search field, and this is a good example of the standalone form control because we don't need the whole form for that. And in order to connect form controls that are part of some particular form, we have the form control name directive, where we just provide the key of the model that we have to connect, and that's it. And for the template-driven forms, we have another more magical approach. So we have some property of a component, and we provide it as a value for the ng model that uses two-way data binding in order to magically connect the class property with the value of the form and vice versa. And here you might raise a question like, okay, it is very clear in reactive forms that we use this form control model, and this is explicitly and obvious. But in template-driven forms, we don't see the usage of it. But actually, if you have a look at the source code of the ng model, you will see that literally the very first line in the corresponding directive class has a property where we create under the hood the corresponding form control model. So it happens just implicitly. It happens automatically by Angular, so you don't have to instantiate it manually as you do it in reactive forms. Then, yeah, the question, like what we can get from it. So this is great piece of information, but how we can apply it in practice. Some of you maybe heard think that in template-driven forms, you cannot reactively react to the changes of the certain form control. Yeah, so if you have form control, you apply an ng model, you cannot track the changes reactively. Yeah, you cannot, I don't know, pipe it with RxJS operators and so on. But actually, knowing what we know right now, we actually can inject the ng model directive, and because it has a property, the instance of which one is a form control model, then we can get this instance through accessing the control property, and we can subscribe to value changes and work with that as if it was their reactive form. So this is how you can use this knowledge and create the functionality that requires your needs. For example, here, this is an example of some control status tracker component where it might be directive that attaches to the control, and you listen to the status changes. If the control is valid or invalid, then you can render dynamically some error messages or whatever you want. There might be quite a lot of different use cases. So I hope it's pretty much clear. I cannot follow the chat all the time, but I hope everything is clear. Anyway, there will be QA session. Write down your questions, and I will try to answer them later. Now let's move forward, and let's talk about synchronization of the values and all the state between the native control and with a corresponding model. Because what we learned currently is how they kind of know about each other, yeah? How we map that this control to this control belongs this corresponding model. But we also would like to know how the synchronization happens, because model has to be always in sync with the native control and vice versa. And this is quite like deep dive is going to be, but it will be very interesting. I actually, when I was investigated that, I was very it was very interesting for me how it actually works and how it was implemented. So if you try to investigate some component that has input with the form control directive applied, or not necessarily it must be form control, it might be a form control name, it might be ng model. So if you try to look at it at Angular Dev Tools, for example, you might see that despite we apply only one directive, form control, actually there resides 3 directives. It is a default value accessor, ng control status, and the form control directive itself. That's quite interesting, and the most interesting part is this default value accessor. And what is even more interesting, if you try to investigate another input of another type, for example, input with a type checkbox, you will see very similar picture, but with only one difference, and the difference is the value accessor. So for different type of input, there is different control value accessor is used. In our case, this is a checkbox control value accessor. And value accessor plays actually the key role in the synchronization of the control state. How it happened, you'll see in a minute, but so far, let's learn what makes control value accessor actually control value accessor. Which requirements have to be performed in order to make some building blocks like directive or component to be a control value accessor that can synchronize values. So first of all, we need the ng value accessor token. This is how Angular will be understanding that this is exactly control value accessor. And the value of this token have to be some class that implements the control value interface. This interface will require you or anyone who implements the functionality implement at least 3 methods. It's a write value, register on change, register on touched, and one is optional. It is a set disabled state. Using these 4 methods, I will rephrase it. These 3 methods allows component or directive or any other element behave as a normal form control from the point of view of Angular. And we will see in a minute how Angular is using these methods. But before, what I want to mention is that implementation of concrete value accessor is very different, and it's different from value accessor to value accessor. So, for example, if we're talking about the default value accessor that is applied to the input with the type text, the right implementation of the right value method will be something like the following. We get the reference to the native element, and we change the property value and assign the value that we get to this right value method. And in such a way, we kind of update the view. We made the view that like the state of the view will be corresponding the state of the eventually model. And because we can work with different form controls which have different APIs. So for another form control, for example, for the checkbox control value accessor, the implementation will be different. And because the checkbox native element doesn't have something like value, it uses the checked property in order to select or deselect a checkbox. Maybe value property also exists, but in order to render this check for the checkbox, we need to set checked as a true or a false. So depending on the type of the control, different implementation of these methods are executed. And now let's try to see how Angular kind of uses this under the hood, how exactly this synchronization is happening. So again, the same a slide. We have input, we have 3 directives residing on it. And here, what's happening, the default value accessor or any accessor is being injected into the form control directive or ng model or form control name. They do these things the same way. So you can see it in the source code right there. So we inject using the inject ng value accessor token. We inject the value accessor that resides on this node. And when we have the reference to this value accessor, we call, or like Angular call inside ng on changes lifecycle hook, it calls function setup control. And there it provides the form, which is actually the model that we provide via directive inside the template, right? And it provides it's like the instance of this directive that has a reference to the control value accessor. And this whole magic, this whole binding happens inside this setup control function. For example, this is how it looks. And this is where the first synchronization of the model and corresponding native form control happens. You can see immediately we call the right value of the value accessor and provide the value that currently has model. We provided synchronization from model to the view happens, and then we immediately check if the form control is disabled. So if the model, if the JavaScript class form control has disabled property to true, then we again call the value accessor method set disabled state and say if it's true or false. And set disabled state already knows how to lock the view in the way to prevent updates from the user. For example, it might set up the disabled property for the native control or prevent some certain events. It's already implementation details, and they might vary from component to component. And after that, there are 4, I call them listeners, but they are not like JavaScript listeners. That's just for me too easier to kind of understand these things. But those are functions that set up kind of binding between model and native control and allows you to synchronize values later, because this is kind of currently we have initial synchronization, but user can type value later, and we should have some kind of listener that tracks the changes in the native control and says, aha, user types new values, then I have to update the corresponding the model. And the same can happen vice versa. So all these things have to be kind of in sync. And this is what I call listeners. And we're not going to go through all of them. We will have a look just at some of them, just to give you some idea or understanding how it is working. So we will have a look at the setup view change pipeline. So this is the listener that tracks changes from the view. So when user changes the value, when user changes, needs to be updated the model. And this is how it happens. So when you call this setup view change pipeline, we call the method register on change of the value accessor. And as an argument for this register on change value, we provide callback function that takes a new value that we will be providing later. And inside it, it gets a reference also to the control. This is our model, so it uses the closure in order to save this reference to the corresponding model. And when this function is called, the value will be updated to the new one inside this function, as well as state will be changed to the dirty. So when we change the value of the form, form becomes dirty, means value has changed. And other properties are updated, and in such a way our model kind of being synchronized with the value that comes from the view. But how exactly it comes, this is what we do manually, actually. And if you have ever implemented the control value accessor on your own, if you implemented custom form control, you probably know that, like, for almost every form control value accessor, the custom one that you implement, you have literally the same piece of code like this, like register on change. You get some magical function, you assign it to the property, and then you call this function whenever you're supposed to change or update the model. Before I started investigation and diving into under the hood, I was thinking like, this is just some piece of magic, and I had no idea what is going on there. But now you know what is going on under the hood and what the magic function you get as an argument for the register on change method. So I hope it is pretty clear. Though I have doubts because it's quite a deep dive. But anyway, what we can get from it, what knowledge, how we can apply this knowledge, which things we can do using that. So it unlocks the non-standard controls, the implementation of non-standard controls for us. For example, like we can create rating pickers that can be the normal part of our form. They also might, they out of the box get support of the validators, for example, right? And it's very, very convenient, and we can implement literally any type of controls, everything what your UI team can suggest you. Usually they come up with crazy ideas, and fortunately every crazy idea now you know how to implement and make it work. And now let's get back to the controls grouping. If you remember, I mentioned a few minutes earlier that in the models hierarchy we have groups and arrays. Models that allow us to group controls either into object or in array, because sometimes it is, especially when we have open-ended lists of data, we don't know how many elements there will be, and very often it is very convenient to work with them as like array, right? And form array allows you to do it easily. And here, like the very similar story happens. In order to connect groups and corresponding parts of the view, we use a group of directives. This is the form group. This is the form group name, form array name, if we're talking about reactive forms. And for template-driven forms, we have only two directives responsible for that. This is ngForm and ngModel group. And by the way, ngForm, I applied this explicitly just for like demo purposes, but in fact, it is being applied automatically immediately once you import the forms module into your component, standalone component, or your ngModule. Immediately, like ngForm will be applied to the form element, because again, I don't have the source code of it right now on the slide, but if you have a look at the source code, you will see that ngForm directive has a selector of the form element, so it will be magically attached. And what is also interesting, that grouping directives we can split into multiple groups. So we have root form groups. Those are directives that represent the root form group. Yeah, the form that contains all other nested groups and form controls. In the reactive forms, we use the form group for that, and for template-driven forms, again, ng forms. And what special this type of group directives, what special features they have? Well, they have actually the submitted state. Yes, they understand when the form is submitted. So if you want to read if the form is submitted, in the models, form group models, even if it's a root form model, you will not find this information, but you can find this information in the corresponding directive instances. So you can inject them and read submit status from there. And also they have method that allows you to reset forms and reset it properly. And what I mean by properly is that when we reset the form, very often we want to reset also the submitted state, right? And in reactive forms, maybe you encountered this situation, but I see quite often that people calling reset method for the root form group model. And it indeed resets the values, resets statuses of the form controls, but it doesn't reset submitted state. And that's why you might get bugs where you reset it, but validation error messages still remaining because they kind of display, because you have condition that they are displayed when the form is not submitted, and when the form is submitted and the corresponding form control is invalid. So this is quite often happens in reactive forms. So knowing this information, you know how to where to reset, because reset methods from those directives, they also reset the submit state, not only the state of the form controls. And the next group we have, it's nested groups. Those are like form group name or form array name in reactive forms. And we have only one ng model group in template-driven forms. They allow us to create the nested group, but as you might notice, the template-driven forms, they don't have the form array directive or anything like that. Only the ng model group is available for us, and form array name, it's only the feature, so to say, of reactive forms. What we can get from this information, actually, I already mentioned that, but now I just get back to it with the dedicated piece of code. So as I said, if you want to, let's name it properly, yeah, it depends on your use case, what you need, but when I say properly, I mean if you want to reset the form along with its submission state, you can get a reference to the form group directive and call the reset form method in order to reset like everything, like completely the form. And we are coming already to the end, and I would like to talk about some useful abstractions that might be also useful for you. And for that, let's get back to the following piece of code that I showed a bit earlier today. This is when you inject the ng model, for example. You want to get, for example, reference to the corresponding form control and track the changes or things like that. But here's limitation. It works only with one type of form because we directly reference the ng model. Right, and ng model, this is template-driven forms, and if you build something like a library, it's obviously not an option because you have to be compatible with all types of forms. And you think like, okay, I want to support reactive forms. You change it, you introduce the form control directive, but you break the compatibility with template-driven forms. And even though this code works only with standalone reactive form controls, if you try to use form control name, like you have to always change it. Yeah, and we need some certain kind of abstraction that allows us to to not depend on the concrete implementation of the form control, right? And for that, we have to dive a little bit into implementation of the directives of the form control name, and ng model. And there we can see quite interesting things. First, you can see that all of them, they extend ng control, some class ng control. And what is even more interesting, if you check the providers of them, you can see all of them have corresponding providers. And inside the providers, you will find the following construction. There is a provider that provides ng control as a token value, and as a token key, and the value of this token is for ng model, it's instance of the ng model. For the form control name, it's an instance of the form control name, and vice versa. And thanks to this architectural decision, we can do the following thing. We can actually inject ng control token, and already at runtime, via dependency injection, the concrete implementation of the control will be resolved, and you can safely subscribe to status changes without even knowing that are you working with template-driven forms and ng model, or it is one of the directives from the reactive forms, because they inherit the same base component, they have the same API, and because of this, they have the same contract. It is safe to access the control and the corresponding values. So this is how you can make your code more like universal using this abstraction. And again, what about the groups? Because with the groups, we have the similar situation. We have a group of the directives that are responsible for that. And we also might want to track, I know, status, like if the group is valid or invalid, right? So there, if you have a look at the source code, you will see also quite similar situation. You will see that they extend like ng form array and others. So we have five directives, right? I didn't have place on the slide to put them all, but in general, the same thing happens there as well. So they all extend control container class. It's a base class, and also they have a provider where provided control container, that value of which one point to the instance of the ng form directive instance, or if it's form array name, then the instance of the form array, and so on. And the same thing we can do with groups. We can simply, if we need, of course, we can inject a control container via this useful abstraction. And in such a way, we can also make our directive work with any type of control containers. Either it is a nested group, or if it's a root group directive, doesn't matter. They all have the same provider, same API, so it is pretty safe to access it like that and make your control status tracker directive even more universal and flexible. And this is everything I would like to say. I hope we are in time, and I hope it was interesting and useful.
Yeah. So yeah, from my perspective, Dmitry, it was extremely interesting to see the forms in depth, and from like some other points of view, taking a look at the architecture of them and so on. Right now, we'll move to the Q&A session. So already saw some question on the chat. Let me bring them on. So the first one is, Dmitry, if we have a very complex form, is recommended to use some external lib like formly for manage them, or is good practice implement this kind of form for ourselves?
It's quite hard to say, because I don't have like experience, the real experience with formally in the real applications, and I don't know how how efficient they are in real projects, in real complex forms. So I saw just like I tried a little bit, but it was just basic things, so I cannot tell exactly. Definitely you have more control creating your solution. Yeah, there you can adjust everything to your needs and forms. This is very like context sensitive things. They are very unique from every project, and you should think about these things that formally like library might not serve your use case quite well, and you would need to like come up with workarounds and things like that. So hard to say exactly, but all approaches have pros and cons. Just take your context and try to investigate what offers the formally and see if it matches your requirements. Then I don't see the problems. Why not? If the policy of your company allows third-party libraries, because sometimes it's quite difficult with this.
Okay, we have the next question from Michal. Good talk. What do you think of the future of forms plus signals, wishes?
I think the forms, and this is what I heard from Angular core team members, that forms, this is really good use case for signals, and they supposed to improve them very well in terms of detecting changes, because the forms sometimes they have problems with that. Signals might bring more like predictability in this area. And overall, I think, yeah, I'm also very curious how it will be working. And yeah, I think it will be cool. I'm keeping my eye on this because of the course as well, because I have to adjust it. But we didn't get them yet, unfortunately. I hope that next version of Angular we will see already first implementation of the signals, and I think it will be really cool. And hopefully nothing will be broken, at least too much.
Yeah,
and the migration will be smooth.
Yeah, but forms and signals is definitely something a lot of us looking for.
Yeah.
Okay, we have the next question. Dmitro, what do you think about setParent method of abstract control class? Should it be internal? Because now it brings the unpredicted behavior when user try to call it.
Ooh, setParent. I don't even remember what exactly happening there. So, kind of.
Yeah, I think it's like
I think I would need to refresh my not the knowledge, but refresh knowledge about how everything works under the hood there, and to give more accurate answer. Unfortunately,
just to be honest, from my side, I don't remember using this kind of the method, so it's probably not so common to set a parent of some abstract control. Otherwise, mostly it will have its parent set already, by default. So
yeah,
but for sure there is a use case where there is the class. But
yeah, I remember this thing, but I don't remember the internal implementations and what is doing, because I also didn't. I don't remember. Maybe I used this. No, I don't remember I used that even in the course. Yeah, so that's why.
We can move to the next question. But we already have something to read about. So
yeah, definitely.
Also good. Hey, Dmitro, how do you typically start building complex forms with nested group array? Do you start from bottom up, breaking down the form first, or you go top down?
It depends. Very like typical answer, but I think I think I go mostly from smaller pieces, from smaller pieces, and then I kind of try to how to say it, orchestrate them or like compose them. So I usually approach this way. I don't start with the big things, splitting to the smaller. I usually go with the small like atoms, yeah, and then build more complex things. But it's very individual. I mean,
Yeah.
usually I
Okay.
do it like that, yeah. But it depends, of course.
Okay. And maybe the last question, and we can maybe simplify it because to just don't be so specific. So what are the most three mistakes working with reactive forms? I would
well, this is first the resetting of the form that I actually I mentioned, and it was inspired actually by one of the code reviews and this bug investigation. Another very popular thing is that I know maybe it comes from some legacy stuff or whatever. People sometimes mixing the template-driven forms and reactive forms together, and this is one of the worst things you can actually do. Then things become so unpredictable, but I see it happens, and I saw it not once. I saw it quite a lot of time, and was very surprised by seeing that. But yeah, and another. The third one, probably that when form control is not implemented as a control value accessor, and it is implemented as a regular component, and then at some point values are merged into the form control. But yeah, if you know what is value accessor and why it is needed, then usually don't do this mistake. But sometimes teams start like from the beginning with Angular without knowing that, and they build such a workarounds that then you have to rewrite.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the last question we got. So I think that's all. Yeah, I can see that's all. So once again, thank you very much for your presentation. Hopefully we'll see and have a chance to see again at some of our meetups. And right now I wish you a good day and thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah, was happy to share my knowledge.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, and right now, finally, we are reaching to our next and last speaker, Manfred Steyer. He is a trainer and consultant specializing in Angular. Additionally, Manfred is regular conference speaker, sharing his extensive knowledge and experience with the community. Welcome, Manfred.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm currently in Germany. I'm with an Angular workshop this week. It's an Angular deep dive workshop, and that's why I'm in a special environment. It's a bit cozy here. It's my hotel room.
Yeah, we saw it on the Twitter, and we were like impressed that, okay, he's already on workshop. At the evening, he will be giving the talk on the other meetups. So you are a busy person. Also, I saw you are just preparing for ng-rom workshops. Everything ready for the workshops or something left?
Yeah, I think it's more or less ready. So the material is ready, the slides are ready. Usually I do some finishing touches the day before just to get into it, but yeah, more or less it's done.
Okay, Manfred, I have a question to you as well, because you and Deborah, which was on our first meetup, you're just in the group of as Angular architects. You are just doing courses, trainings, and so on. So what is one of the famous training right now, and what the attendees can expect from this training specifically?
Yeah. So our main product is our architecture workshop, our Angular architecture workshop. And it's about planning large-scale applications that can be maintained in the long run. You know, usually you have this issue, you start with a new project and everything is cool, but after 2 or 3 years, you have the impression you cannot maintain it anymore. And to prevent this situation, we provide during 3 days a lot of things, a lot of tools so that you can maintain it nicely, that you can plan it nicely.
Okay, that's awesome. So before I let you just show your presentation, I would like to mention to all of our community who are just watching us right now that we have the dedicated discount for Angular.love. It will be visible on the chat. It's like 30% discount valid till end of the June. So make sure you will use it and just join some training from Manfred. So without taking more time, Manfred, the stage is yours, and see you on the Q&A session.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So you should see my slides now. So let's go on. So this presentation is about successfully using signals. And for this, I have prepared 3 effective rules for you. And if you follow those rules, using signals will be a bit more straightforward for you. I want to get started with some pictures. You know, I live in Austria, and when people think about Austria, they mainly think about nature. You know, we are this country in the Alps, we have a lot of mountains and a lot of nature. People like to go skiing. However, there is also a very serious topic people think about when talking about Austria, and the serious topic is Sacher cake. Sacher cake is one of the special desserts we have here in Austria, and we have quite more here. And this is what this whole presentation is about. It's about Sacher cake and further Austrian desserts. And besides this, I will also talk about some stuff in the area of signals from the perspective of an architect, from the perspective of someone who makes using it simpler and more streamlined. So it's about computed signals from this perspective. It's about effects. It's about the RxJS interop, and it's about stores. The result of all of this is 3 rules. So I'm distilling out 3 rules of this. You know, here in Austria, we distill a lot, and that's why I also like to distill out some rules. And I have 2 hints for you. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Manfred. I'm a trainer and consultant for Angular, and I and also my nice colleagues focus on Angular in the enterprise. In this role, we are doing a lot of consulting and a lot of trainings. I'm also quite connected to the Angular community. I live in Austria, where we have Sacher cake. I do a lot of stuff in Germany, and I'm always happy if I can work together with people around the globe. We have a lot of customers in the Switzerland, also in Poland and in other parts of Europe. Okay, so let's get started with Austrian desserts. Austrian desserts is actually my example application. So let me quickly start it up. Ah, it's already started, yeah. It's even better. It's my example application. No, it's not started. Something happens. I think I pressed something here. Ah, come on. It's this sign, this rooftop. And here we go. Yeah, here we have our Austrian desserts. And yeah, in this application, you can find out a bit about all of them. You see pictures of them and you see the names. We have here the English name and we have the Austrian German name of all of them. And the most important thing is you can rate those desserts. You can say, well, Sacher cake is okay. Apfelstrudel, apple pie is also quite nice. But trust me, the best of all of this, the best is Palatschinken, which is our way to refer to pancakes. In German, you have different names for this. In Austrian German, we call it Palatschinken. And I did some research. I found out that Austrians borrowed those names from the East, from Eastern Europe, and it landed there from Latin. And basically, Palatschinken means cake, so it's not a bad name, I guess. And yeah, Palatschinken is really nice. It gives me a lot of memories from my childhood where my grandma baked them for me. Usually we eat them with jam. But if you want to go pro, if you really want to go pro, you eat it with ice cream. This is by far the best. And here, 5 stars out of 5 stars is not enough. And that's why I've implemented a cheat mode. Click here. If I'm double clicking the star, then I can select up to 500 stars, which is quite a number. 500 stars out of 5 stars. When it comes to ice cream, pancakes, mathematics does not count anymore. Okay, cool. So this is one part of the application. Another part is we can search for our desserts. For instance, I can enter cake here, and this gives me a nice filter. And I can load expert ratings, which are my ratings, and then you get my star rating displayed. So more or less, this is the example application. So let's get started to talk about signals and about how to use signals for such an application. And I want to get started with computed. But before we talk about computed, let me quickly tell you 3 or 4 things about signals in general. You know, signals are this new building block in Angular, this new reactive building block. Basically, a signal is a value, and this value is encapsulated in this object. And you can read the value, you can update the value, and after updating the value, you can get notified of the new value in some circumstances. And yeah, this is more or less what we also have with RxJS and observables. But the thing is, it's really simple. It's not as powerful as RxJS, but it's also simpler. And the Angular team wants to give us this building block to get started with something that really comes with very little ceremony. Something that might be okay for, let's say, 80% of the use cases. And for everything else, we can switch over to RxJS. Why do we get signals from the Angular team? Well, it's all about the fine-grained change detection. A signal can tell us and Angular when it is changing. And so Angular knows, well, I need to update this very component here. And this is also one of the keys for zoneless Angular. You know, with Angular 18, we got zoneless Angular in an experimental mode, and zoneless Angular can benefit from signals. It also works with the async pipe and observables, but using signals for it is a bit more streamlined. So if we look at a component without signals, we see, or with signals, we see that we just need to wrap all the values we want to data bind in a signal. Then we can call a setter. The setter is updating the value. And then we can read the signal, for instance, within our template. And when reading the value, we need to call the getter, which is basically the signal with full parentheses. So we don't need to type in .get, just use the signal and full parentheses. One of the nice things here is that if we read a signal in a so-called reactive context, and the template is such a reactive context, then the context is subscribing to the signal. It's automatically subscribing, and so it will get notified when something is changing. That means just by reading the signal in the template makes sure that template and Angular is notified, and so Angular knows when to update this very component. The subscription happens automatically. By the way, also unsubscribing happens automatically. And another nice aspect here is computed signals. It's just a computation that is using existing signals. And one of the nice things is every time one of those used signals is changing, the whole computation is repeated. It's more or less what we know from selectors in the world of NGRX. It allows us to compute our view models, some data structure that is in the form we need for this or that use case for this or that component. So now let's talk about computed in the context of an architecture. And for this, let's switch in my application, into my demo application. If you want to repeat my live coding, you can just check out the branches here from the slides, and then you have exactly the same state as I started off with. Okay, so if we look here into the source code, we see that we have here a desert component, and this desert component is about searching deserts and rating deserts. And there is some criteria. For instance, there is a property original name to search by the original name, and we have the same for the English name. We have here a flag for loading, so that we know when to display the loading indicator, and we have a desert signal which holds our result, a desert array. The first part of this component is not that spectacular. It's about searching our deserts. I'm grabbing my criteria. I'm calling the find method in a desert service, and I'm getting back my deserts. I'm putting those deserts into the desert signal, and I'm also maintaining the loading flag. When it comes to the remaining parts, it's a bit more special. For instance, do rating is combining the loaded deserts with the loaded expert rating. The loaded expert rating here is a map, basically a map that is projecting the IDs of our deserts to the rating. This means that desert 1 gets 5 stars. Or here we would say desert 2 gets 4 stars. And so on. Yeah, and everything is intermingled here with each other so that the rating is reflected by the desert. When we are calling load ratings, we are also loading my expert ratings. Then we combine the already loaded deserts with those expert ratings and update the deserts. And this is somehow strange, isn't it? Because it's all about loading ratings, and even though it's about loading ratings, we need to update the deserts. If we use something like this, we get code that is really hard to be maintained. And it's even harder if we realize that there are, let's say, 5 positions in the source code where we need to update ratings and deserts this or that way. For instance, here we have another position within the source code where we need to update the ratings. This is when we rate our deserts by hand. So always updating the ratings and the deserts is somehow an error-prone thing. And that's why we can really improve the source code with computed. For this, first of all, let me introduce a signal for my ratings. It's a signal with the type we have seen before, this map type, desert ID to rating map. And we get started with just an empty map. Then, after loading the ratings, let's just put those ratings into our signal. This dot ratings set ratings. So this makes a lot of sense because all of this is about ratings. And then we can compute out of the ratings and the deserts everything we need. For instance, deserts with ratings could be a computed signal. And here I'm just calling to rated. I'm passing in this dot deserts and this dot ratings. So what happens now is that computed will compute those deserts with ratings. And every time this or that signal is changing, everything is recomputed. So we are always up to date here. We don't need to remember to update this data structure here or there. It's always automatically kept up to date. And our code is more local. When we deal with ratings, we update the ratings. When we deal with deserts, we update the deserts. So let me quickly update my view. I want to iterate through the deserts with ratings. And also here, I want to get the length of this data structure. So let's try it out. I want to have Palatschinken. No Palatschinken. English, pancake, cake. Yeah, perfect. And if I load the expert ratings, everything works here. This brings me to my first architectural rule: synchronously derive state where possible. In the world of reactive programming, in the world of functional programming, it's not that usual to update state. We really try to prevent the need for updating state. When possible, we derive state, because derived state is always up to date. However, we need to do this in a synchronous way, because computed only works in a synchronous way. There is currently no async computed in Angular and in the space of signals. So for async stuff, we need something else, and we will talk about this in some minutes. Let's talk about a second thing. Let's talk about effects. So as you might know, an effect is just a side effect using signals, and every time one of the signals is changing, the side effect is repeated. Let's look at this within another demonstration. So in this demonstration, I'm going back to my deserts component, and in there I'm defining a constructor, and this constructor spans up an effect. And first of all, let's just log something out. Let's log out our original name. And let's log out the English name. That means every time the original name or the English name is changing, this effect will run again, and so we get this console output. Let's try it out. F12, F12, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. So everything, one of those signals is changing, the effect is re-triggered. And actually, logging something out to the console is a good use case for an effect, because in general, effects are for logging, or not logging, for doing some rendering stuff that is not possible with data binding. Rendering not possible with data binding, and I have some good examples for this. A good example is logging, because you cannot log with a data binding. Another example is showing a toast message, or a snack bar, as it is called in Angular material. Another good example is drawing at an canvas. 2D rendering, 3D rendering, and perhaps a fourth good example is writing into a reactive form. All of those are good examples for going with effects. Rendering stuff not possible with data binding. In general, you can say an effect is intended for the last mile between your system and your view. Somehow you want to transport data into your view. Effects, however, should not be used for propagating state. So let me show you an anti-pattern. If I used an effect to bring some state into a service, let's say I had service and update or search, then just using such an effect to propagate the original name in there is not a good idea. And there are several reasons for this. One reason is if we use effects for propagating state, it's very likely that we are defining reactive chains, where one change is leading to another change, that in turn is leading to a third change, that in turn is leading to a fourth change. And if we have something like this, controlling the system is really difficult. We don't know anymore what happens when we change something here. This is one of the issues. Another issue that is somehow related to the first one is if we have such a chain, such a reactive chain, we might end up with a cycle. And also hunting down cycles and debugging cycles is really difficult because they lead to an infinity loop and our browser might crash. That's why we are not allowed by default to write a signal within an effect. So if I would say, well, the original name is the same as the English name, because nowadays everything is English, then we would get an exception from Angular. Let's try this out. Here is the exception. Writing to signals is not allowed in computed or an effect. Use allow signal writes in blah, blah, blah to enable this inside effects. So by default, this is not allowed. This is a child safety facility the Angular team gives us, but we can deactivate this facility by allowing signal writes. Then something like this is possible, but then we are responsible for making this safe. This is perhaps like a typecast. First of all, the compiler says, no, this is not a possible cast. But if we do an explicit typecast, then we are telling the compiler, hey, we know what we are doing, we are experts, but then we are responsible if something goes wrong. And as you see here, now my two fields are synchronized. See this as the last resort. You should really avoid signal writes or effects propagating the state. You also find this statement in the official Angular documentation. It might be the case that when migrating existing codes to signals, that you need to go with something like this. But if you start writing new code or if you have some time, then please avoid this. Instead of doing something this, you can totally go with computed by computing one out of the other signal. So let's comment this out. This brings me to my second rule, namely avoid effects propagating state and signal writes. Let's talk a bit about the RxJS interop. I already told you before that signals are really great. They are simple and they are suitable for, let's say, give or take 80% of the use cases. For the remaining use cases, you need RxJS or something else, but usually we go with RxJS because it's really powerful and we have experience with it because it's baked into Angular, isn't it? And so it's really good to know that you can convert each and every signal to an observable and vice versa. So let's have a look into an example for this. For this, let me quickly jump over to my branch 05A, no, 05B. And here, now I have a reactive version of this application. We don't need a search button anymore. I just need to type in some letters and when I'm doing nothing for some milliseconds, then my result automatically appears. Check. So to implement this, I'm using two functions from Angular core RxJS interop. It's toObservable and toSignal. ToObservable converts a signal to an observable, and toSignal does the other way around. Still, I have here my original name signal and my English name signal, but here I'm converting it to an observable. And then I'm using the magic and the power of RxJS. Stuff like combining both streams, filtering, debouncing, switch map, and also error handling. And something like this is really difficult to accomplish without RxJS. Implementing a debounce time or a switch map by hand is nothing I want to do because it's error prone and it's infrastructure code. It shall be done by someone else. Saying this, as you know, switch map and all the other flattening operators are also wonderful because they give you guarantees in terms of race conditions. So let's assume we are searching for A. And before we got the result for A, we are switching so that we want to search for B. And before we get the result for B, we are switching again so that we want to search for C. Switch map will only give you the last result. Everything else will be aborted, which is what the user would expect when searching by criteria and when changing the criteria. The user would not expect that the result of A is blinking for some seconds, so that the result of B is appearing for some seconds, so that this result is replaced by the result for C. This would be bad UX or UI. And yeah, switch map takes care of this. Switch map gives you some guarantees for overlapping requests, and that's why it's also quite valuable. As you see here, we can also convert back an observable to a signal. This brings me to two hints I want to give you. The first hint is signals play well together with RxJS. You can really have the best of both worlds. And the second hint is avoid race conditions, and RxJS with switch map, exhaust map, and so on really helps you nicely to do this. Let's talk about a last thing. Let's talk about stores. And before I want to talk about stores, I want to show you this nice, good old video game, The Incredible Machine. Perhaps you know it, The Incredible Machine. It's about producing a side effect that leads to an side effect that leads to an side effect. So let's have a look here. The bowling ball goes down. It triggers the cannon that is triggering the balloon, and so on and so forth. So it's really a fun game to find out how to arrange all those items so that you get your final side effect. But honestly, if your application looks like this, you really have an issue. Because then your application is not maintainable anymore. Then you don't know anymore what happens when you change something here. And one way to prevent this is the good old unidirectional data flow. And stores can streamline this unidirectional data flow. Here I have a quite abstract perspective on a store. It's about a component that has some intention. It wants something to happen. And this intention is sent over to the store. In a Redux-based store, the intention is about triggering an action. In a more lightweight store, like the Signal store, the intention is just about triggering or calling a method. But at the end of the day, somehow you tell the store what you want to happen. It's about the what. This is what I'm calling intention in this abstract perspective. The store is then performing some tasks, and this could also be an asynchronous task. For this, the store could use RxJS. RxJS is quite good at doing async stuff. And after this task is executed, we get new values. Those values are put into a signal, and the signal now transports these values into the components, or to be more precise, into the view of your components. And this happens in a synchronous way. And when doing so, we can project the values using computed to our view model, to the representation of our state we need for this or that view. You might have deserts and ratings. Sometimes you want to combine both. Sometimes you want to have the ratings without your deserts, and sometimes you want to have your deserts without your ratings. And here you can compute everything together in the structure you need. So I think the key takeaway of all of this is that signals are mainly suitable for the right side here, for synchronously transporting values into your view and for synchronously projecting your values. Signals are not suitable for async stuff, and signals are not suitable for defining an intention, because this is most of the times about listening to an event, and signals are not intended for events. So you need other stuff for the remaining parts, and this other stuff can be a store and or RxJS. So let's have a look at a demonstration for all of this. Let's check out the branch. Here in this example, I'm using a very simple store. It's a handmade store. So store is quite a big name here, but basically my store is just a service that provides some methods and some signals. That's all. And as you see here, I'm grabbing those signals from the store without parentheses. I don't want to have the values. I want to have the signals. Those signals are data bound. And then I'm calling some methods in the store. And as you see here, the intention goes up. The intention is load deserts. Something happens there. And when the deserts are loaded, they are put into my desert signal and everything is flowing down. Perhaps the desert signal is also combined with the rating signal. There is some computed signal there. And so I get my rated deserts. And it's similar when I want to update my ratings and so on. The intention goes up and the result of the action goes down. So as mentioned, you don't need a store library. Of course, there is the great NGRX store, the Redux-based one that supports signals. There is the brand new NGRX signal store. It's also a very nice implementation. I would recommend to look into it. But at the end of the day, just going with a service, providing methods and signals is good enough. And this brings me to my last architectural rule, namely stores make your reactive flow more manageable. So if you like this presentation, you will very likely also like our ebook. It's a brand new ebook. It's currently in the 2nd edition, and it's about modern Angular. Here we talk about all the things, signals, how to use them correctly. We also talk about the new control flow syntax, the variables. We talk about how is it called? I just lost it. About standalone, yeah, standalone components and standalone APIs. So it's full of those modern stuff we got recently in Angular. So download it here for free. Also, if you are interested in this stuff, have a look into our workshops. We are doing the English version of this workshop in about a month. It's end of July. So go to our website and book your ticket there. Let me come to a conclusion. Basically, we've talked about 3 architectural rules. One rule is synchronously derive state where possible, and we use computed for this. The second rule is avoid effects propagating state and signal writes, because then we might end up with an incredible machine where one change leads to another change, leading to a third change, and so on. And think about using stores, because stores stream align your whole flow and they make everything more manageable and predictable. And finally, those rules are enforcing each other. Just let me give you one example. To avoid effects propagating state, you can derive state synchronously, and you can use stores for the async stuff. Very likely stores use RxJS underneath the cover. And this brings me to my 2 hints, namely signals play well together with RxJS and avoid race conditions. And also here, RxJS does a great job with switch map and exhaust map and so on. And last but not least, please remember that ice cream pancakes, Eisballerschinken, is the best dessert in Austria. So if you come to Austria, then all you need is to know the term Eisballerschinken, and you will be on the same side. Give it a try. So thanks for having me. I have already uploaded my material to my blog. You find my examples there with several branches and my slides. And follow me on Twitter to stay in contact. Thank you.
Thank you, Manfred, for your awesome presentation. And I already see some side effect of it, that I will have to eat some dessert tomorrow to my morning coffee. So,
oh yeah, great.
Okay, so let's take a look at the Q&A. I saw already some question whether you're following the Euro in the Germany, whether you are watching games.
Oh no, I'm not really a football fan or a soccer fan. It's not my topic. So funnily, I'm not very sportive, and it also gave me a trauma. We always played football in school. We had to play it, and I was never selected for this or that group. So I was the last one that was selected, and I just went to the group that had less players. So yeah, it's not that
okay. So you don't have like a good memories regarding the football, yeah?
No.
If they maybe will select you today, you will play on a Euro, yeah? But right now we don't know. Okay, let's see the questions. I have number of checkbox in table. Then how to manage state of checkbox, checked, unchecked, select all state with signals. It's like some specific question.
Yeah, so the good message is, meanwhile, you can directly data bind a signal using ng form, and you can even go with a two-way data binding. So the banana in the box syntax is meanwhile fully supported for signals, and this might be one option. Of course, if the value comes out of a store, then the value might be read-only, because usually we don't want that everyone is capable of updating our state. We want to update it in a well-defined manner, don't we? And in this case, you might want to go with reactive forms. And then you can just write the contents of the signal into a reactive form. And when you save it away, or if you just change your form, then you can send up the changes to a store, for instance. So those are, I think, two good possibilities for doing something like this.
Okay, there is another question. What do you think about signals and forms for the future?
Yeah, so currently we have some support. I mean, if we stick to reactive forms, not much is changing. The only thing that is changing is that now the source for our form group and form control is a signal. But eventually we will get more support for forms. The Angular team is thinking about updating the form support for signals in the first phase, and rumor says that might already begin this year. In the first phase, they want to add signals to the forms API. And in a second phase, they might think about unifying our two form models to just one model of using forms. So perhaps we get something that combines reactive forms and template-driven forms.
Okay, that's awesome. There is another question from Marcus. Would you say that using untracked in an effect would be a good solution to bypass allow signal write, or is that cheating?
No, so I think it's even better than using allow signal rights. If I have a bit more time when doing this presentation, then I'm also showing this pattern. I think it's meanwhile quite a pattern using effect with untracked. So I think it's the way to go. And I think you can avoid it quite often with the patterns I have presented today, but not always. There are still some remaining cases where you need an effect propagating state, even though we all know we should avoid it. But sometimes that's not that easy to be accomplished, because sometimes we just want to use the signal we already have. And Angular provides more and more signal-based APIs. We don't want to bypass them. So it might feel a bit more natural in some cases. And yeah, for those cases, effects with untracked is a good solution.
Okay, we'll pick two last questions. So when should we use Redact-based store and when should we use signal store? Additionally, is it recommended to use the Redact-based store and convert selectors to signals?
Yeah, so that's actually a good question. So I think if we look back, let's say 5 years, then the Redux approach was the go-to approach for stores. Most people used some Redux-based store 5 years ago when they used the store. Meanwhile, I think people have found out that Redux is really cool, but sometimes it's too much. There are use cases where Redux is just too much, and those are use cases where each and every component has its own state. It might be global state because we might need it later again, but it might to be bound to one component or let's say one feature. And in those cases, Redux does not really help that much. However, if we have a lot of components that need to access the same state and a lot of the same state, then Redux is really king. So in those cases, I would stick to Redux. In other cases where a feature has its own global state, I would use a more lightweight store. And I think people are thinking more and more if they need Redux or if something more lightweight could be suitable. If we look into other framework communities, this is also the case there. Solid.js comes with a lightweight store. In Vue, we have some lightweight stores. In React, it's also quite usual to use lightweight approaches meanwhile. So this is the first answer. The second answer is
whether it's recommended to use the Redux-based store and convert selectors to signals.
Yeah, so the good message is you don't need to do this because the Redux-based store, the NGRX store, has now a method that's called select signal. And it just gives you back a signal. You can pass in your selector and you get back your signal. And that's actually a good message because if you have already invested into Redux, if you have already invested into NGRX, the traditional store, all you need is to switch out the select method by the select signal method, and you have your signal for data binding.
Okay. And the last question, signal is fine-grained change detection. Does it mean it will only trigger change detection cycle for specific component without the whole tree?
Yes and no. So currently it's somewhere in between. Eventually we might get there, but currently, if we, let's say, use on push and signals, then Angular will mark the affected component as dirty. However, as on push still climbs down, top down the component tree, all the parent components are also marked. They are not marked with dirty, but they get another marker. And so Angular knows that it needs to go down there. It knows that it does not need to check the components in between for changes, but it knows to go down there to find the dirty component eventually somewhere in the leaves or somewhere down in the tree. So it's somewhere in between, but perhaps eventually we might get there, perhaps with Signal components, that we directly jump to the locations where we need to update something, or that we just need to update a portion of a component, which is also one of the visions of the Angular team, to find out that we just need to update this right side of the component, but not the left side of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was the last question. Thank you, Manfred, for your time. It was an honor to have it with us today. And we are looking forward to have you in the future meetups. And have a nice day. Get your rest.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, guys, so it was the final lecture of our Angular Spring Camp, but the event is not over yet. We invite everyone to join our online networking session via Google Meet. The link to join will be in the chat. What's more, we would like to ask you for your feedback because it's incredibly important for us. So please take a moment to fill out our survey about the experience at the event, how we can improve. So hopefully it will help us to make even future camps better. Once again, thank you for such a large presence. The entire camp was prepared with the full commitment of the entire Angular.love team, Angular experts. We are thrilled to have shared so much knowledge and to have met so many wonderful people. Our camp is coming to close, but our meetup journey continues. We have more exciting events planned to the fall. Don't forget to follow us on social media to stay informed about upcoming series and other updates. See you soon.